Hi and welcome. In this series, I'll take a look at some notes and expand on Michel Makarius' book titled Ruins. I'm going to be taking a look at Chapter 5. This section is titled In the Garden and focuses on an umbrella of ideas tied to ruins, including gardens, dreams, and wandering. I'm also going to shift from a chronological point of view to one which spans more than a single century at a time. The text prefaces this section with an important book called the Hyperallergic Polyphily. It was written by an anonymous author that is believed to be Francesco Colonna and was first published in Venice in 1499. Although Makarius doesn't go into depth about this book, it's worth doing a bit of a deep dive as the Hyperallergic embodies the garden and the dream state at a transition from medieval times to the Renaissance. There are some elements to this book that are an important preface to the rest of the section as well, because it is part of a larger circle of influential thought that has allowed the emergence of what is to come later on in the 17th and 18th centuries. The book is a fictive romance that presents a mysterious, arcane allegory in which the main protagonist, Polyphilio, pursues his love, Polia, through a bucolic, classical, dreamlike landscape. Often there are scenes within the text in which architectural elements are accompanied by rhapsody as well. There are also moments in which Polyphilio becomes lost or needs to choose between several options or entryways. Finally, it's also important to note language within the book. It's written in an unusual Latinate Italian. It has a lot of words based on Latin and Greek roots, and also includes illustrations with Arabic and Hebrew words, as well as inauthentic Egyptian-inspired hieroglyphs. So, what's so important about this book anyway? Well, the Hypnerotomachia presents elements that were adopted at a later point in time by creatives and thinkers through the construction of gardens. There are two very important styles that we should discuss before moving forward. These are the French garden and the English garden. The French gardens were very symmetrical and orderly. Often they are planned with a sense of visual unity in mind, in which all parts are connected to a central axis that leads to a palace or main residence. A good example of this is the gardens at Versailles. In many ways, this was a way of communicating the indivisible and absolute power of the monarchy, as well as of control over nature. The English garden, also referred to as a landscape garden, is in many ways a rejection of this style of planning, where everything is orderly and leads to a known end result. These types of gardens were disconnected from the centrality of a residence as well as from symmetry. Instead, they provide a person walking through the garden a sense of leisure, wandering, and discovery. Often these gardens were not as meticulously pruned, and the growth of plants without attempting to control them was given far more agency. Although this style of garden was gradually adopted, it became immensely fashionable and spread throughout Europe. From a contemporary point of view, they do seem somewhat loosely related to theme parks such as Disneyland, for example. I think that this connection might become more apparent as we continue. A quote by the philosopher John Locke on page 125 is useful in understanding why this gardening style emerged. It reads as such: "One is to walk around it, committing mental impressions to memory as one proceeds. The English philosopher holds that understanding nature means turning its discovery into a history, and the discovery itself is the offspring of mental life. Indeed, these meandering paths, where nothing allows one to predict what is coming next, trace a path intrinsically favorable to a gamut of feeling. From this point of view, ruins, totally absent from French gardens, will acquire pride of place in a new image of nature." Within many English gardens, there are constructions called the Fabrique. It's a term that isn't really in use anymore, but was originally used to refer to artificial monuments and constructions, sometimes representing ruins, that were constructed or placed in gardens of the 18th century. Many English gardens utilized the Fabrique, particularly mock ruins. The Fabrique was often a way of exoticizing a garden and the impressions it left with a viewer. This led to the insertion of some pretty unusual architectural elements, including columns, obelisks, Egyptian pyramids, and Persian kiosks, among others. Something extremely important here is that Chinese gardens were a major influence to the English at the time and were considered a model for the genre. That's why many gardens include pagodas in their organization. Also, that creating a scene or image in the mind of the viewer was extremely important in the creation of these gardens. English gardens were philosophical spaces. There's a strong relationship here between the garden, walking, and contemplation. The ruin or other object of fascination presents an intense moment of looking, but is a fleeting experience of discovery, in many ways, almost like looking at a painting. There are a couple of fabriques that I'd like to take a look at. The first is known as the Temple of Philosophy at Hermenonville in France. The Temple of Philosophy was created by none other than Hubert Robert on an island called the Island of Poplars in the middle of a lake. The building is a bit deceptive because it looks like a ruin, but is deliberately left as an unfinished building for a new philosopher to respond to. There is an absent column that has an inscription at its base. I tried looking for an image of the inscription, but with no luck. It translates to the question, who will complete it? There are 6 other columns, each dedicated to a different philosopher. This is accompanied by an epithet for each philosopher as well. They're all above on the screen. The second fabrique I'll take a look at is the Désert des Rets. This was a very popular site and included famous visitors such as King Gustav III of Sweden, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson. It's also important to note that a lot of these kinds of sites contain Masonic symbols that made them ideal locations for meetings between scholars who understood their meaning and significance. The column was built between 1780 and 1781 and was inspired by Doric columns. The diameter of the column is about 15 meters wide, with a central staircase that leads upward to 3 floors. Light came from above as well as from windows and cracks on the structure. The inner walls were lined with what's referred to as joy print, which is, very loosely speaking, cotton or linen printed with designs of landscapes and figures. Sometimes these are used as wallpaper. There were also a large number of mirrors inside the space that reflected the garden that could be seen through slits in the fluting of the column-like structure. To end this section, I have some questions. Isn't a ruin considered an authentic witness to a long series of events and degradation? How can these constructions be considered ruins? The philosophers and creatives of this time period believed that although the Fabrique was a representation of a ruin, it was a type of philosophical object that evoked similar feelings and thoughts. It's duly noted that there were people who objected to the structures at this time. I have a link to an interesting article from Hyperallergic that's related to the ideas in this recording as well that are worth taking a look at. Well, that's it for section 5, of Makarius's book Ruins. If you like this content, please like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for listening.